Right, so the topics of today's training is essentials of pharmacovigilance throughout the product's life cycle. And my name is Angel Buendia. I'm the knowledge manager at Scilife. I'm going to just explain you which is the structure of this webinar. It has three parts. This is the introduction, right? I will present you later on the two special guests we have. And the training will last about 45 minutes. It is about pharmacovigilance, and we will have enough time, about 10 minutes, to reply to your questions. This is going to be the Q&A session. Okay, so I encourage you to post as many questions as you want. We prefer to use the Q&A button so I can collect these questions and let's present them at the end. Okay. All right. So as you know, pharmacovigilance is a very critical component in the pharmaceutical industry. It helps to identify and also to prevent adverse effects, and finally to ensure the patient safety before and after a medicinal product is approved for use, right? So this training will introduce you to the pharmacovigilance activities that are required throughout the product's life cycle. So I'm excited to have Carol, General Manager at QBD, and Anam, Pharmacovigilance Consultant at QBD too. And they're going to provide you with an understanding of the pharmacovigilance activities which are required throughout the product's life cycle. For example, during the clinical development, at the time of marketing authorization application, and also to the post-marketing authorization, right? So if you want to enhance your knowledge on pharmacovigilance and have an overview, a general overview of how to comply with regulatory requirements in this topic, I think we are in the right place today. So I'm sure you're going to be worth your time. And with that said, I want to welcome Carol and Anam. Hello, good morning to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us today. Carol and Anam, how are you?
Morning, thank you very much.
All right, perfect. So before we start with the training, let's launch a very short poll, right? We want to know which is your main interest in this session, okay? So let's see which are your votes. Are you interested in clinical trials? Are you interested in marketing authorizations and post-authorization phase? Or both? This would give general information, very important for Anam and Carol today. We are going to cover all of them, but let's see which are your main interests. So let's leave just some seconds. Good, we have a lot of interaction. Thank you very much. All right, I think I'm ready. Okay, let's end the voting and let's share the results, Carol and Anam.
Okay, very interesting. Good. Well, we are going to be covering all of those areas. So great that majority of people are interested in both sides. Clearly, we have a limited time, but you have the options for Q&A, as Angel has mentioned. So anything we don't cover, please address it there. And if we're not able to address it in the time today, you will have our contact details and we can follow up separately. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So now it's the stage is yours, Carol and Anam. You can start with the training, and let's see you at the Q&A session at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Angel. So, hi, thank you everyone for joining. This webinar will focus on the fundamental PV aspects of a product from the clinical development phase through to the post-marketing phase of the drug. We aim to deliver an overview of the key principles of what is required for patient safety, as well as providing an understanding of the regulatory requirements which need to be followed. I would like to start by giving an introduction to the meaning behind pharmacovigilance and why it is important. The word pharmacovigilance comes from pharmakon, which means drug in Greek, and vigilare, which means keep watch in Latin. By definition, pharmacovigilance is the science and activity related to the detection and assessment of adverse effects and understanding how these can be prevented or minimized. The aim is to prevent patients at risk of experiencing adverse reactions to not take the medication. However, it is not as simple as that, as all patients are unique and it would be difficult to know every risk associated with a certain drug. As such, healthcare professionals are trained appropriately and patients are informed of the potential risks and advised to stop taking the medications if an adverse reaction does occur. This slide shows pharmacovigilance processes and activities during the drug development process. As you can see, each phase has specific areas which need to be addressed at some point in the product's life cycle. I will give a brief overview of some of the processes. So that you can see that signal detection is generating a risk-benefit profile continues throughout the life of a product, whereas SAE and SUSAR reporting and processing only occurs during the clinical trial phase. A DSUR, which is a Development Safety Update Report, is a document which provides an annual overview of all serious adverse effects for the active substance and all SUSARs for the annual period, and is also reported during the clinical trial phase. Line listings of all SUSARs are provided to investigators throughout the clinical trial. This is usually conducted every 6 months, but can be more frequent if required. So now we move on to the MAA phase, where we have literature searches, and these are commenced on application of the marketing authorization. And it is a search which is conducted for adverse events to the medication and class effects to products within the medications class. Another aspect of the MAA is the PSMF, which is the Pharmacovigilance System Master File, and it provides information on the QPPV, the MAH organizational structure, source of safety data, computerized systems, PV processes, system performance, and quality systems. Next, we have the Risk Management Plan, or RMP. This is to address uncertainties regarding the safety profile at different points in a medicinal product's life cycle. And lastly, for MAA, we have the QPPV, which is an individual named by a pharmaceutical company as the main person responsible for ensuring that the company meets its legal obligations for monitoring of the safety of a medicinal product on the market. Once the product is authorized, we move on to adverse drug reaction processing and reporting. And finally, we have the PSUR, which is Periodic Safety Update Report, which is a pharmacovigilance document intended to provide an evaluation of the benefit-risk balance of a medicinal product at defined time points and post-authorization. We'll be discussing these in more details in the next few slides. So there are various ways in which the pharmacovigilance department can communicate to different stakeholders, and that communication is a key part of pharmacovigilance. It is important to understand that data being received by the PV department will need to be relayed to relevant external stakeholders when necessary and in a timely manner. There are many methods of communication for this, but the most widely used currently would be via email. In this section of the webinar, I will talk through the clinical development phase of a drug and how it ties in with pharmacovigilance. To start off with, I will go through some key terms which are used when a case is received during clinical trials. The first being an adverse event. This is when any untoward medical occurrence in a subject to whom a medicinal product is administered and which does not necessarily have a causal relationship with this treatment. In simple terms, this means when a patient has encountered a negative experience during the clinical trial, which may or may not be associated with the drug administered. It is important to understand that an adverse event is unfavorable and unintended. So, for example, an AE can be an abnormal laboratory finding or a disease temporarily associated with the drug. Next, we move to adverse reaction, which is a response to a medicinal product which is noxious and unintended. The principle here is that with an adverse reaction, there is a causal relationship with the drug, meaning that the adverse event experienced is at least a reasonable possibility for the reaction. There are also other ways in which a patient can have an adverse reaction, which would be considered as terms outside of the marketing authorization. These include off-label uses where a healthcare professional has used an approved drug but for an unapproved indication. Another example is abuse of drug, where the consumer has persistent or sporadic intentional excessive use of medicinal products which is accompanied by harmful physical or psychological effects. We now come on to the term SAE, which means a serious adverse event. This is classified as serious as the event is either fatal, life-threatening, permanently disabling, causes hospitalization or prolongation of hospitalization, or causes a congenital anomaly. An important medical event would be considered when the event does not fit the other outcomes, but the event may jeopardize the patient and may require medical or surgical intervention to prevent one of the other outcomes. The Naranjo algorithm or Naranjo scale is a questionnaire which is used to determine whether the likelihood of an adverse drug reaction is due to the drug rather than the result of other factors. A series of questions are asked and each answer is ranked by different point values. Once we have concluded that the event occurred is a serious adverse effect, we need to figure out the causality. A causality assessment essentially means finding a causal association or relationship between a drug and a drug reaction. It is an evaluation of the likelihood that a particular treatment is the cause of an observed adverse event. This is a crucial and challenging part of pharmacovigilance, in which attempts are made to find out the exact drug responsible for causing the drug reaction. This is also important in clinical practice as more and more drugs are flooding the market, which are used by patients, and we are more likely to see further side effects because of this. As the safety of patients is more important than efficacy, identifying the culprit drug becomes essential. The Causality Assessment Tool, CAT, helps clinicians to identify the culprit drugs and determine whether the drug reaction is certain, probable, possible, or unlikely related to the drug in question. The next step would be to determine the severity of the adverse reaction and how this may impact the daily life of patients. A reaction which is mild or minor in severity is one where the patient does not require an antidote or any specific treatment. An example would be a standard antihistamine causing drowsiness. However, this is usually made clear on the labeling. A reaction which is moderate in severity, however, does require possible change to the current treatment, whereby a drug can be added or one can be discontinued. In some cases, patients may also require hospitalization. A common example for this would be non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs such as ibuprofen causing hypertension. And a reaction which is severe in severity is one where it can be life-threatening to the patient and requires immediate discontinuation of the drug and treatment of the ADR. An example of this would be where the use of phenothiazine, which is used to treat psychotic disorders, has caused a reaction of an abnormal heart rate. In the world of pharmacovigilance, day 0 is considered to be a very important day. It describes the first day in which any partner receives all details of a case to make it valid. Determining day 0 can impact future reporting timelines, so it is vital to ensure that once we are aware of this day, to swiftly move along the flow of reporting. This slide shows the serious adverse event workflow and how different stakeholders are involved in the process. For each ongoing clinical trial, there will be a data management team who fundamentally manages the cases received and records them into a validated safety database. The serious adverse event, along with relevant information, will be sent on to the pharmacovigilance department, who will enter the data into their own safety database. A qualified professional will then assess the serious adverse event and report any SUSARs, which we'll come on to later, to Vigilance, which is a separate database used for monitoring the safety of medicines. In order for this process to work efficiently, you need to ensure that the company holds a validated database. It is also important that the relevant PV personnel have knowledge of the reporting requirements and that there is someone employed to apply their medical knowledge to the case. The relevant employees involved should also have appropriate agency portal training and experience with Vigilance. I will now discuss the reporting timelines of a serious adverse event and how day 0 comes into play. Once the investigator has received all the details for a valid SAE, the regulatory reporting clock begins and day 0 starts. The case information must then be reported to the sponsor by the investigator in accordance with the approved protocol and within 24 hours using the provided SAE form. The SAE form must have the relevant sections filled out needed for a valid case. If follow-up information has been requested, then this can be sent to the sponsor at a later date. It is important to understand here that once you have the valid case information, this needs to be sent out as soon as possible. Further information can always be sent later, and you should not delay sending the initial report in wait of follow-up information. For non-serious adverse events, the process is slightly different, and these do not need to be recorded into the safety database at all or expedited to the authorities. Alternatively, these cases can be recorded on a case report form and summarized in the clinical study report at the end of the study. Moving on to another key term used when dealing with SAEs, which is SUSAR, and this stands for Suspected Unexpected Serious Adverse Reaction. A SUSAR is an untoward and unintended response to a study drug, which is not listed in the applicable product information. It must also meet one of the following criteria, which I have previously mentioned. It is a serious case, so it either results in death, is life-threatening, requires hospitalization or prolongation of an existing hospitalization, results in persistent or significant disability, or causes a congenital anomaly or birth defect. This slide shows the reporting timelines of a SUSAR and again highlights the importance of day 0. It is a responsibility of the sponsor, or if appropriate, to delegate another person to report a SUSAR to the relevant regulatory agency in a timely manner. For fatal or life-threatening SUSARs, there is clearly more of an urgency, so these cases should be reported as soon as possible, but you are allowed up to 7 days to report. If any follow-up information is received after the initial submission, then they should also be provided separately, but within 8 days of the initial report being submitted. For non-fatal and non-life-threatening SUSARs, you have a slightly longer time frame. However, it is still recommended to report the initial case as soon as possible, but you do have up to 15 days to report the SUSAR after you first become aware of the reaction. I would lastly like to touch on a key document which is prepared during the clinical trial phase and the importance of it. This is a development safety update report, which is an internationally harmonized safety document which covers the safety profile of a medicinal product during the clinical trial. It is an annually reviewed document which is submitted 60 days after the data lock point up until the clinical trial has ended. The first DSUR should be submitted by the sponsor within 1 year of the development international birth date, which is the date of the first authorization of the clinical trial in any country worldwide. The document adequately monitors and evaluates the safety information obtained by the sponsor during the reporting period. This typically includes SAEs and fatal cases which received during the reporting period, new safety issues that could have an impact on the protection of clinical trial subjects, summary of current understanding and management of identified and potential risks, and providing an update of the status of clinical investigation development program and the study results. I would now like to hand over to Carol, who will deliver the second half of the webinar.
Thank you, Anam, for giving an overview of the key activities during clinical development. So I'll move now on. Hopefully, you've had a successful clinical stage and you are now thinking about preparing the product for its marketing authorization. And I'll be focusing on the requirements for Europe and the UK. Right, let's move down. Okay. So the first one to discuss, and some of these terms you'll have seen on the earlier overview slide that Anam presented. So a significant resource is required to prepare the Pharmacovigilance System Master File, or PSMF, if your company is preparing for its first marketing authorization. The PSMF is a system that describes how you, as a company, will ensure your legal obligations are met. It includes many aspects, including the organization of your company, the relevant SOPs that are followed, any subcontracting of PV activities, the computer systems that you use, and the products that it covers. It also details key performance indicators that you're required to set to monitor the adequacy and performance of the system. So clearly, a PSMF for a large multinational company with many products can be very different to a small company and its first product. But the overall requirements are the same. So before submitting the MAA, you need to have requested a number for your PSMF from the regulators, stating where the PSMF is located. And the company must be prepared to provide a copy of this to the regulators within a couple of days of that request. Only a summary of the PV system is required in the actual MAA submission. So as mentioned, this really is a lot of effort to set up in the first instance, but then for future products, you're much more into a maintenance phase. Included in your summary of pharmacovigilance system and also in the actual MAA form itself are the names and contact details of the qualified person for pharmacovigilance. So this is a senior individual who has overall responsibility for the PV system for the company. Their responsibilities include establishing and maintaining the system for collecting information on ADRs, having an oversight of appropriate ADR reporting and the writing and review of periodic safety update reports. They're required to oversee the signal detection activities and being heavily involved in the overall evaluation of the benefit risks of a medicinal product. There's required to be a 24/7 contact point for the regulatory agencies. Now, this person does not have to manage all of these aspects directly. They can delegate certain parts, but they must retain overall responsibility. And they will be the key agency contact in any safety issue or PV inspection. They're therefore a fundamental role within the organization, and they must have the authority to ensure the system operates correctly. Moving away now from discussing overall system processes within a company, each product in Europe is required to have a risk management plan. And this has to be presented in the marketing authorization application. This is a significant document for new chemical entities, less so for a generic product. The two main elements in the RMP is, first of all, part 1, which really describes the product, the condition it's treating, findings from non-clinical studies that could trigger potential concerns in humans, and explains about the number of patients or healthy volunteers exposed in the clinical trial program and post-authorization if the product is already approved in another country. So information from the product will help to determine what risks have already been identified in clinical studies, what could be potential risks, So that is, you've not seen them, but they are plausible, e.g., for example, with a class effect. And it also explains where you have gaps in your data, which they call missing information. So this is often data, for example, related to use in pregnant or breastfeeding women, because not surprisingly, clinical trials are rarely undertaken in these patients. Part 2 of the RMP then really describes how the company will minimize the risks of each of these. And so it could be due to, you could be minimizing the risk by explaining in the summary of product characteristics for the healthcare professional, the leaflet that's contained with the medicine for the patients, or it may require something more extensive if it is a high risk. So there could be a special program required to ensure doctors are appropriately trained before prescribing the medicine. This is a living document that will evolve over the product's life cycle as more information is known about the product. And going back to the role of the QPPV, they're required to sign this document. I wanted to touch on what is considered really the fundamental document for a product, which is the product information. So this is a collective term in Europe, which covers the summary of product characteristics, which is a document written for the healthcare professional in medical terms. It also covers the labeling that's included in the actual packaging of the product, and the leaflet for the patient, which is included in every pack. So the product information, therefore, is really the communication tool to the medical community and the patients, and any promotional material must be in accordance with this document. So the adverse drug reactions from the clinical studies that Anam described earlier in the session will be described in the SMPC and the package leaflet. It's therefore critical that the data collected in the clinical studies are thorough and accurate. So in addition to knowing that the ADR occurred, it's important to know about the timing of events so that you can explain to the healthcare professionals and patients that some reactions may occur at the start of the treatment, but resolve over time. So this is important to keep the patient motivated and compliant. It can also describe the severity of the events to the healthcare professionals and patients, so they know what to expect. And all of the ADRs that are in medical terms in the SMPCs are described in the package leaflet for the patient in patient-friendly terms. So hopefully you now have received your marketing authorization, and then you can move into the activities post-authorization. So the first fundamental part of pharmacovigilance after approval is to ensure that you have a system to collect and report adverse reactions during the product's life cycle. And these can be reported to the company by healthcare professionals and the general public, and you must treat them all in the same way. All companies are subject to PV inspections by regulatory authorities, and they will check that you're meeting the required obligations. So similar to Anam describing for clinical, in clinical, there is again the day zero. So that begins when any employee of the authorization holder or their contractor becomes aware of an adverse event that includes the minimum criteria for reporting. So you must therefore ensure all employees and contractors are appropriately trained. This doesn't have to be extensive training, but really focus on what an adverse reaction is, so anyone in the company would know what to do with it, the criticality of reporting of the timing, and who they should pass that information on to. They should also be aware of the need for data protection of personal information. So the adverse reaction is then passed to the pharmacovigilance team, who will include all of the ADRs into a validated database. and they will make an evaluation of the seriousness, as this then determines the reporting timelines to the agency. So serious reactions should be reported within 15 days, and these are calendar days, and non-serious reactions within 90 days. Literature searches are also helpful to build up the company's safety knowledge of their product. And it is a requirement to start these from the day of submission of your MAA, so that if there are class effects with similar drugs, these can be built into the overall benefit risk assessment during your marketing authorization application. Literature searches are expected on a weekly basis and should be performed on a global basis for English language papers, and on a local basis when the product is launched in a specific country, to pick up any local language papers or communications. So if you notice an ADR is reported in the literature, then you need to treat it the same way as if you've received it yourself. So you should assess it for minimum reporting criteria, and if met, include it in the database and submit to the agencies. So how is the collection of adverse drug reactions used? It's not sufficient just to receive them individually. So the PSUR, which is the Periodic Safety Update Report, is a critical document to evaluate the benefit risk profile of your product post-authorization. And this is a requirement to submit these to the agencies, and they will inform you at the time of your approval as to what frequency will be applicable to your product. So typically for new chemical entities, you're required to submit your PSUR every 6 months for the first 2 years, then annually for 2 years, and then every 3 yearly intervals. So this is a comprehensive report that evaluates the safety information received in that time period, and also putting it into context of cumulative information. The regulatory agency will review the PSUR and decide if any further investigations are required, if any safety signals are noted. They may decide that the product information should be updated with a new ADR or reporting to ensure that the healthcare professionals and patients are informed. There are many other elements to pharmacovigilance, but really this is a very broad overview. But one area that I wanted to ensure was covered in this time is ensuring you are kept up to date with changes in requirements. So agencies expect companies to be kept up to date with changing PV requirements. And to do this, they expect to see a formal process documented that is available for during their inspections. So it's not good enough just for individual people to occasionally scan websites. So the process should cover which websites you will scan, how often, and those websites should ensure that you cover changes in legislation and guidance of the key elements of the PV functions relevant to your function and your products. So for example, if you don't perform clinical trials, then you're not required to scan for changes in these requirements. It should also follow any information received from agencies regarding templates they expect you to follow and changes to how their portals are operating for submitting ADRs or documents. A key point is MEDRA, which is a medical dictionary, is updated on a reasonably regular basis. And you need to be keeping track and deciding about implementing the latest version of that dictionary, as that's fundamental for ensuring that the ADRs you put into your database are appropriately coded. So before we wrap up the presentation, I wanted to show you a useful source of information, which are details of inspection findings, which are published by the MHRA. And the MHRA hosts a symposium typically every year on good pharmacovigilance practice. And as part of this, they provide details of inspections they've conducted and compare findings year on year. So it's extremely useful, and they recognise the benefit of sharing that knowledge with marketing authorization holders so that they can improve their systems. So they made a comparison from 2019 to 2020, where all of the inspections were conducted on site, from moving from 2020 to 2021, moving to more of a remote system, which was obviously triggered by the pandemic. And perhaps just to clarify that for MHRA, the calendar year for 2020 would have ended in March 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. So they do continue now with remote inspections, or at least hybrid inspections, as they can be more efficient. You'll notice that each inspection typically takes over a week, and so it does require significant investment in time for the company, both in the preparation, hosting, and then the activities required post-inspection, such as responding to the report and implementing CAPAs. To give you an idea of the key areas of concern, you can see some of the distribution of critical, major, and minor findings. So this isn't the full list, but more telling perhaps is some of the commentary MHRA provide, which is on the following slide. So here, the quality management system, that does include the PSMF. So clearly, there's been a lot of at least minor comments in that area. And the risk management points there, where there's quite a lot of major points. That's often if a company has additional risk minimization activities. So in addition to your SMPC and package leaflet, they may be required to provide additional educational training for the prescribers. And as part of that, the agency therefore expects you to keep clear tracking of which prescribers have been trained. Have you updated them if the SMPC was updated? And are you communicating to the right prescribers as agreed with the regulatory agency? So this is the actual text that MHRA provided. And I think what you can see on some of these points is it's often related to the lack of cross-communication within the company. So regulatory authorities expect to see those linkages. So for example, people who are checking product quality complaints and receiving those, they need to be really careful to make sure there isn't a report of an adverse drug reaction included in that complaint. And therefore they should be forwarding that on to the PV team. And a common theme for many years links to the strong connection required on the final implementation of the outcomes of regulatory procedures. So ensuring that once you've agreed updates to your product information, that the artwork occurs and that the new cartons, leaflets, whatever, are manufactured within a timely manner. And the qualified person who has to release each batch of material, and they are declaring that they are releasing it according to the latest information, is kept in the loop so they can always have access to the latest version of the product information, because this is really the fundamental tool for communicating, in particular to the patients. So really, in conclusion, I hope that we have given you an introduction to pharmacovigilance, and we've shown you that this is a key function throughout a product's life cycle. Capturing good adverse drug reaction in clinical trials is key, as it impacts the future product information, which lives with the product, and it's extremely difficult to remove an adverse drug reaction from the product information once it's included, even if erroneously. So all these clinical trials that may occur many, many years before the marketing authorization, it is important to keep that long-term view for capturing good quality data. And the PV function really can add value to the company when they have both strong processes in place and a good scientific and medical knowledge, both of the products that they have and also the conditions that they treat. So thank you for your time, and we will now move over to the Q&A session.
All right, Carol, thank you very much. Yeah, Carol and Anand, thank you for this comprehensive overview of the life cycle of pharmacovigilance. I know that you have covered a lot of issues with a very short period of time. So thank you for that. And now let's go to the Q&A session. We have already received many questions, and yeah, we'll do our best to respond as many as we can. If not, don't worry, because we are going to cover all of them by preparing a PDF document we're going to send to you with the main highlights of this webinar. Also, we will also introduce those questions and the answers, right? And other interesting information related to this topic. All right, so let's go for the first one, Carol. Okay, what about if an individual case safety report, the ICSR, is not reported to the authorities according to the timelines, Carol? What happens?
I think Anna, that's not.
Yeah, that one. So the key thing to do would be to report it to the authorities as soon as you are aware, even though it would be considered late. The next step would be to raise a CAPA. So especially for audit purposes, just so that you can cover why it was late and how you can prevent this in the future, and also to possibly keep a sort of internal file note so that you have it on your system as well. But the main thing would be to report it as soon as you are aware.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. I hope it answers the questions. If not, yeah, let us know. Then let's go to the second one. Carol and Anand, is it still considered day zero, even if you don't have all 4 reporting criteria?
Okay, yeah. So in simple terms, that would be no. You do need all 4 minimum criteria for it to be a valid case. So I could see somebody said if there was not an identifiable reporter, so yes, that would be considered not valid. So until you have all 4 minimum criteria, the day zero also does not start.
So you should try to attempt to obtain those 4 criteria, hopefully if you can get back to the reporter to complete the picture.
Okay, all right, good. Let's continue with the first one from Rahima. Are there any legal requirements regarding the CV, the curriculum vitae, of the qualified person responsible for this pharmacovigilance process?
Okay. I'll answer that one. Yeah, okay. There's quite broad discussion at a European level. So they are required to be a senior person. They do not have to be a medic, but they are required to have access to a medic if they're not a physician themselves. So it is someone who has had a number of years experience in the pharmaceutical industry and directly within pharmacovigilance. Some countries do have their own special national requirements, and I think even in some countries you can register, but that is not typical at a European level. So there are no sort of, I say, absolute rights and wrongs, but you need to be confident that that person does have the knowledge. You will be required to have the CV on file, and it will be available for the agency to evaluate if they consider that person is suitable.
Yeah, I see that competence is one of the key factors. I understand it's very important in pharmacovigilance and clinical trials. Okay, good. Let's go for the next one. Also from Rahima. Are there any databases that are considered primary and consulted for incidents reported in the context of pharmacovigilance? What kind of databases? Yeah.
So certainly the agencies don't make any comments for the databases that companies are using in-house. There are many proprietary databases. They can be in-house databases as long as they are validated. I suppose I am just wondering if it relates to like the EMA does have a database to search, and also for certain products they search also for literature. I don't know, Anna, if you can add anything more on that.
Yes, I agree with what Carol said. We do use literature search databases, and the EMA has sort of the XEUMPG database as well, which captures all the marketed products.
Okay. All right. There's another one. Do you have to prepare a PSUR if you are not the originator of a product?
Yes, you do. And the EMA does publish the EURD list. If you Google EMA EURD list, you will find an Excel table of all active substance approved across all of Europe. You then search within that, because there's obviously thousands of entries there, and it will tell you when the active is due for its next PSUR. So all marketing authorizations submit for that active at the same time, and one assessment is made. So the assessors will review the findings that come out from all the MAHs, and they will come to a conclusion across all products. And that may mean that all products have to implement a change to their safety information in their product information. So yes, they are required to keep track of that as well.
All right, thank you, Carol. Okay, another one related to competences. What qualifications are required to become a qualified person that is responsible for pharmacovigilance?
Yeah. So I think that's similar to the one we mentioned before. So they need to, have significant PV and drug development or post-authorization experience within a company. They do not have to be a medic. Certainly, pharmacists are, or life science graduates can be. So I would say it's certainly it's a graduate role and beyond, but very rarely are there absolute requirements. So this differs perhaps slightly from, people may have heard of the term of qualified person, who is the person who releases each batch to the market. For that, I would say there are more rigorous requirements and exams that people have to undertake and qualifications they have to take. That does not exist for QPPVs as of today.
All right, thanks. Thanks for that. Let's continue with risk management. What is considered as risk minimization measures in relation to the risk management plan document?
Okay. So fundamentally, for all products, you would always say your first risk minimization is your SMPC for the medical community and the package leaflet for the patients. So thinking beyond that, some elements can be the fact you would say, well, this is a prescription-only medicine. So this isn't something you're going to be able to just pick up at a pharmacy. So again, that does give a level of control there. If, there can be, I work on a product where it's extremely efficacious, but there are some safety concerns around, say, liver function. And so the SMPC does explain that regular monitoring of your liver function tests are required. But the agency wanted to go beyond that to minimize the risk. And so they required educational materials to be produced. And so the system there is that the agency with the marketing authorization holder will agree the broad context of what these educational materials must contain. But then before launching the product in each country, you must have that obviously translated and you get that agreed at a local country level. So because there may be local medical practices deciding who you should be communicating that to. So these kind of educational materials, it could be a brochure that is really focusing in on these key concerns to make it really clear before the prescriber uses the product that they're aware that liver function monitoring should occur on a regular basis. And the company is required to have evidence that they gave that to the prescriber and that they've tracked their receipt of that. And then if any changes occur during the life cycle that would amend that, you need to show that you've got a whole efficient change control process to show that you informed the prescribers of any new information. So I say, so often it's around access to the medicine through the legal status. And then almost the next level is through educational material. And if people use the electronic medicines compendia in the UK, I think everyone knows that the SMPs are on there and the package leaflets. Now within the same tab, if the product has educational material, that is also included as sort of a third tab for what is required for that product.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Carol. Okay, we have 5 minutes left, so I think we have time for 2 or 3 more questions. We have a question from Lawrence. So is it an obligation to have in place a safety managed plan in view of pharmacovigilance system?
Okay, so I think that relates more to the clinical phase. Yes, so the PSMF is only required at time of sort of marketing authorization. But a safety management plan or a safety data exchange agreement absolutely is required during the clinical phase. So it's not as extensive as the PSMF, but because obviously clinical trials is a much more controlled environment, but it does it ensures that you are going to meet your legal obligations and that the different parties involved in the clinical trial, so data management, clinical project manager, medical monitor, and the PV team all know exactly who is responsible for which aspect. So absolutely, safety management plan or safety data exchange agreement is required in the clinical phase.
Okay, Thank you. We have another one related to communication of safety information, right? So how is new safety information communicated to healthcare professionals and consumers?
So it really depends on the, the way it's communicated depends on how serious the safety concern is. So, for example, if there was a new adverse reaction occurring, then the marketing authorization holder, they would evaluate that. The pharmacovigilance team and a wider team would look to see if that warrants, is a valid signal, basically. If they consider it to be a valid signal, then they would be discussing with the regulatory authorities to get their input. And if that's agreed, then they would be submitting a change to the marketing authorization to update their product information. So it all comes back, as I say, to the product information. The agency will decide how critical that information is. And so if it's highly, they may require you to update your package leaflets and SMPCs within a very short period of time. And they may also require you to send out a Dear Healthcare Professional Communication, a DHPC. For that kind of communication, the regulatory agencies only really want to use that for extreme safety concerns, because they do not want these communications to be going to a doctor day in, day out. Otherwise, they lose their impact. So I say, if it is a serious concern and the agency wants that to happen, they will agree the text with you as the marketing authorization for the communication of that letter. You will also have to agree with the agency how that is going to be communicated. And then, similar to these educational materials, you will need to track exactly who that went to and was it received. So you need to have a sort of signed for delivery, or it may need to be given by hand. So they're probably the key points. The agency, bear in mind, they have the overview of all the products, so they may start to trigger. They may have heard of a signal at a class effect level for another product, and they may then come to the marketing authorization asking for further information, and they may trigger what's called a referral procedure. The output of that, though, is pretty similar to what I've described. That in the referral procedure, they will gather the information, evaluate it, decide if action is needed, and if so, then again, it will be about altering the product information and having that communicated either through standard updates to the leaflet and SMPC, or through a DHPC, or in the UK, we always used to call them Dear Doctor letters. Okay, nice response. All right, so I think we've covered, we have not covered all of them. Anyway, don't worry, because we're going to prepare the responses and send it to you with a PDF document, right? So I hope you found the information useful today about this pharmacovigilance life cycle. And I want to thank Carol and Anam for their support to prepare this training with this very short period of time. And I also want to thank all the participants for taking the time to be here today and to pose all these questions for Anam and Carol, right? And for those that who still don't have your responses to your questions, right? So we'll do our best to respond them by email. And okay, with that said, I wish you all the best today and have a lovely day also. Thank you very much for being here. If you want to get in contact with us regarding this issue, you have the contact of Carol and Anam. Thank you very much for being part of this webinar, right? And see you in next training sessions and next month, okay?
Goodbye and have a nice day.
Thank you. Goodbye.